Carolyn Leavitt is just bad at her job. Now, that is how I start most videos about Donald Trump's press secretary, but it's just because it's so true. She is always off message, she is clearly out of the loop, and she loses it whenever she is met with even a little confrontation. And that includes when she appears on the Fox propaganda outlet, in which we saw her get pushback for one of the biggest scandals of the Trump administration and was unable to answer as the Fox host surprisingly continued to call her out. It was an absolute meltdown from Carolyn Leavitt. We're going to get into it all, but before we do, if I could quickly ask you to leave a like on this video, and if you haven't already and you enjoy our channel, to hit that subscribe button. It goes a long way, and it really does mean a lot to me. Now, before we get into Carolyn Leavitt getting shut down, asked about Trump's immigration scandal, I want to hear a report from Rachel Maddow that I think shines some important light on it.
Administration as chaotic as this one, it can sometimes be hard to tell on a day-to-day basis when things are going bad in just kind of a run-of-the-mill way versus when things are going bad in a not at all run-of-the-mill, maybe actually consider panicking kind of way. It's hard to tell sometimes on a day-to-day basis. But one of the good indicators that something really big is going wrong is when you get news that people who have really big jobs in one part of the government, they all leave. They all quit or are fired suddenly, all of a sudden and without warning. And it's because they had been trying to stop something from happening. They weren't able to stop that thing from happening, and so now they have left the agency. They have left the government. That is a pretty reliable sign that something quite big and quite bad is happening. And you only see these things every so often, even in an administration as disastrous as this one. For example, there were the senior prosecutors who resigned after the Justice Department ordered them to drop the corruption case against New York City's mayor. There was the longtime official who resigned from the Treasury Department after people working for the president's top campaign donor demanded access to the most sensitive payment systems in the whole U.S. government. There was the top official for vaccine safety in the whole U.S. government who said he would not give Robert F. Kennedy Jr. and his new team unrestricted read-write access to a very sensitive central vaccine database. And again, I'm no expert, but I feel like I can measure the size of the splash that's being made by this particular cannonball at the IRS by the news of who is leaving the agency all of a sudden and without warning because of something going wrong there. This news started to come in last night, just as we were getting off the air, when we got news that the acting head of the IRS was gone. She had resigned over a Trump administration plan for the IRS to give sensitive tax data to immigration authorities, so the Trump administration can use it to target immigrants. This woman had been acting commissioner for less than 6 weeks. She had been appointed after Trump's previous acting head of the IRS also abruptly resigned in another controversy. That alone is a bad sign. But apparently she was not the only senior person at the IRS who left because of this standoff. The New York Times then reported that the IRS's chief financial officer, the IRS's chief of staff, the IRS's chief risk officer, all have also resigned in recent days. Same with the IRS's chief privacy officer. The top lawyer at the IRS was also reportedly demoted recently as this plan to use tax data to target immigrants was starting to come together. Now, that's a lot of people to have to fire your way through, right? Whatever the reason for all these high-level resignations, whether it's to stop this plan for using tax data to go after immigrants, I don't know. I feel like I need to understand why that is so dangerous and why so many people, including people elevated during the Trump administration, might feel like that was the hill they needed to die on. That was the reason they needed to leave the agency.
It is incredibly clear that Donald Trump is using whatever level of power possible to go after and illegally detain and deport as part of his disgusting mass deportation plan. This is what we've seen from the beginning. In the first weeks of the Trump administration, I brought up how I expected them to start making some bigger public spectacles because they weren't getting the numbers they've wanted. And now that is exactly what they are doing. They are deporting people without due process. They are stealing. They are kidnapping without any information, lawful permanent residents. And when Carolyn Leavitt was asked about it, and one of the very strange decisions they made with this plan on Fox, she kind of just melted down as the host continued to talk about the scandal.
Can you shed some light on this? Because it was a story that we all covered, that he was the East Coast leader of MS-13. So what was the evidence that supported that proclamation by the Department of Justice and the FBI?
Here at the White House, we applaud the Attorney General Pam Bondi, our FBI Director Kash Patel, for working hand in hand with local law enforcement on the ground in the Commonwealth of Virginia to detain and arrest this MS-13 ringleader. There was sufficient evidence to do so, and now the case is in the hands of the Department of Homeland Security, who will be deporting this individual from our country. These agencies are working together in a collaborative way to follow President Trump's directive to eradicate MS-13 and foreign terrorists from United States soil. So this is an individual who was detained and arrested because of the president's policies, and he will no longer be residing in the United States of America. And our
I'm just trying to get some clarity on it, Caroline, because, you know, if indeed he is what we were told he is, the East Coast leader of MS-13, wouldn't it make sense to prosecute him for crimes related to that? I know he was held on a gun charge, but to make sure that any victims of MS-13 through his leadership get their day in court here in the United States, and then send him to an El Salvadoran prison if he is deported and found guilty on those crimes.
Well, again, this administration is doing things differently, Martha, and this president has made a directive to his agencies, particularly the Department of Homeland Security, to remove foreign terrorists from America's homeland to protect American citizens. And we have an incredible diplomatic relationship with the president of El Salvador and his government, who have been detaining these MS-13 ringleaders and violent gang members in their prisons. And American taxpayers don't have to foot the bill for that cost. And so, again, the bottom line
the Supreme Court said that the Alien Act could be used to remove people, but they had to reach due process first. I'm only pressing on this because it was a huge story and we covered it. Obviously, it would feel like that person could lead to a lot of other evidence. The DOJ would be pressing to see this in court so that other people could be exposed, and suddenly none of that's happening. So can you explain why the change of course in this particular case?
Again, what I can tell you is that the president gave a directive to eradicate MS-13 ringleaders and gang members from our nation's communities. That is what's happening here. And to anyone who believes that these individuals should be living in America, the American people think differently. That's why they reelected this president by a historic margin. And
that's not what we're suggesting. We're just asking if he's, should be held in a prison somewhere until he faces justice in the country. But
he should be removed from American soil. And that is the policy that this administration is following.
Okay.
So there's no real reason that Carolyn Leavitt could give, one, for why there is no due process being given to anyone who's being detained under Donald Trump's mass deportation plan, which I'm shocked that Martha McCollum at Fox was asking about, but also, and a point that I think needs to be brought up a lot more, why, when they determine that someone is a gang leader, if the White House does, and usually they're incorrect about that, but if they were, why they would immediately want to just ship this person out of the country, why they wouldn't prosecute them for crimes committed in the United States, why they wouldn't try to get more information, as Martha McCollum brought up. And Carolyn Leavitt says, well, it's about the cost to the American taxpayer. Sure, there is a burden of keeping people imprisoned in the United States upon taxpayers, but isn't there also a protection element of that? And it also doesn't make sense for you to be talking about cost with this mass deportation plan when you spent, what, $36 million shipping people to Guantanamo Bay for no reason, only to bring them back? Clearly, you don't care about this. There is no grounding principle in what Donald Trump is doing. He is just trying to make a spectacle. And the fact that Fox can point that out and Carolyn Leavitt can't even answer is just so surprising to me. They have no idea what they're doing. This is all about intimidation and trying to scare people. And Carolyn Leavitt knows that, but she can't say it. But someone who can, though, is Jasmine Crockett, who called out all the lies of MAGA's immigration fear-mongering in a great takedown right here.
Should be deleted, or maybe just defunding the African American Museum. The list kind of goes on and on and on, but I am not here to talk about why they are racist. I am here to talk about some other things as it relates to immigration. So let's get to that. you know, it's interesting because we got all these theories. I don't know why we put up with getting data and facts if we just gonna sit here and talk about how we feel. So, you know, maybe we can inject some facts into these feelings. I'm not really sure. But as somebody who has actually practiced criminal defense, I don't know if there's anybody else in here who has. I can tell you that I have handled thousands of cases, not hundreds of cases, thousands on the state level in Texas, Arkansas, and the federal level. And I can tell you that, you know what? If I had to look at the vast majority of the cases that I was representing criminal defendants on, the vast majority of them just didn't happen to be immigrants. These are just the facts of my experience, and maybe the immigrants went to somebody else. I don't know, but I can tell you in my actual experience, in real life, in reality, and not in this fallacy world that y'all are making up where you hate on everybody. So my Republican colleagues are here using today to continue pushing this false narrative of sanctuary cities harboring criminals, yet right here in D.C., we have a 34-count felon being harbored in the White House. The hypocrisy coming from your side of the aisle over concerns regarding lawlessness is outrageous. Right now, House Republicans are conducting town halls with constituents lying about our legal system. That, quote, there is no due process if you come here illegally because you violated the law. That immigrants, quote, are not entitled to due process. Nowhere in the Constitution does it say that. We all want to live in a country where we respect the law. So I'm a bit surprised that Republicans aren't up in arms with Trump detaining and deporting U.S. citizens and people who are lawfully present here in the United States. What Trump and ICE are doing is a disgrace, and it's all being done without respect for our laws. For example, Mr. Neri Alvarado, a Dallas-based baker, was arrested and deported to El Salvador prison for having an autism awareness tattoo in honor of his 15-year-old autistic brother. This was done despite never having been to El Salvador, despite having no gang affiliation, and despite having no organized crime connection. He was deported because ICE agents have been detaining, quote, all Venezuelans with tattoos. And to be clear, this type of racial profiling isn't just a one-off. In fact, the ACLU, using DHS's own data, mind you, found that at least 65% of the states and local agencies voluntarily working with ICE have records of racial profiling and civil rights violations.
We know what they are ultimately after. It is to intimidate, it is to make people scared, to make them unsafe in their communities. That is always the end goal for MAGA. It is up to us to push back against that and to make it clear that Donald Trump doesn't care about immigration. If he did, we would have seen the passage of that bipartisan border deal. That didn't happen. I don't know why it hasn't come up now that Donald Trump has the presidency in both houses of Congress. It's almost like they like talking about the issue more than they like solving it. But then it is up to us to call that out, which is what we're doing on this show. And if you want to support that, as always, you can hit that subscribe button, leave a like on this video, and if you're stuck around to the end, drop a blue heart in the comments. And until next time, I'll see you soon.